Welcome to 50.1's The Point this afternoon. Here alongside me, I'm Michael Kaplan. Here alongside me with is David Morey. David Morey, global strategist, consultant, award-winning speaker, and co-author of the book, The Underdog Advantage. David, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming. And fittingly, the Underdog Advantage is the topic of today's conversation. So, David, when we talk about the Underdog Advantage, we think, sports teams upsetting, the heavily favored sports teams. We think of David versus Goliath. In this context, what do we mean by the Underdog Advantage?
Well, the Underdog is based on a book that I wrote with my business partner for 30 years, Scott Miller, and it notices the advantage of the underdog everywhere we look today. In every industry, politics, entertainment, music, you look at any place, the companies that are succeeding, the political campaigns that are winning, in fact, the leaders that are succeeding around the world today are fighting like an underdog. And an underdog basically does three things. They're different than the incumbent. They have a point of difference that matters in their marketplace. Number two, they move faster. They're more agile. And companies have a hard time doing that effectively today. And number three, they welcome change, because change is happening everywhere we look, in politics and business, everywhere. That's what 50.1 is all about. That's how we were born. We came out of politics, because politics is about change. Running campaigns is about change.
So when you say insurgents versus incumbents, it's important to point out that as acting like an insurgent doesn't necessarily mean that you are a startup, that you are an Instagram.
That's true.
You can be a big corporation or a big name and act like an insurgent.
That's a great point, Michael. Most of our clients are big incumbent companies that want to act more like insurgent companies. They want to play more offense. They want to move to the attack by default. They want their culture to have a more aggressive, insurgency, or being an underdog or an insurgent are the same things, and it's really a way of thinking. It's a way of moving on the attack. It's the way winning campaigns get 50.1% of the vote, and we borrow those strategies and we apply it to the business world.
Now, for incumbents out there, what is the hardest thing to get that insurgent mindset? To start acting with that mobile, with that dynamic, with that kind of fierceness, play offense type mindset? What's the hardest thing to make that transition, and how come more of them don't do it?
Well, you've got to get it right inside out. This model was based on 100 years of studying politics, military history, businesses. It's gotten stronger. We did 16 winning global presidential campaigns around the world. We've worked with 5 Nobel Peace Prize winners, 8 billionaires. And what we've learned from people smarter than us is the strategies apply to big companies and small companies. And the trick is, if you're a big company, if you're an incumbent company, startups, insurgents have a natural sort of play offense. They have no choice. They've got to go on the attack. But incumbent companies get stuck sometimes within their own culture. Here's a statistic. 50%, nearly, of a company's brand today comes down to the CEO. And if they lead like an insurgent, if they lead like an underdog, if they kind of take this 50.1% approach and they go on the attack, they do that inside out within their own culture, then the whole culture starts thinking like underdogs. And that can make, that's what companies like Uber and Skype and even Politico a few years ago are examples of. These are companies that you never heard of that sort of create this sort of startup insurgency culture. We try and apply that in Washington campaigns and campaigns around the country to big companies as well, because the big companies sometimes forget the insurgent roots that got them there in the first place.
So what is the most important thing then that incumbents need to kind of keep in mind as they continue forward? And that could be, now, if they have leadership that's been there for a long time, or if they have new leadership coming in, what's the number one thing that they should be mindful of moving forward and implementing their strategies and their business model?
Well, they have to. I started by saying change is in control of every marketplace. The people that are winning elections today are change leaders. The people that are succeeding leading governments are change leaders. And the great CEOs are change leaders. The number one respected in the world today, by the way, the number one respected leader in the world today is Pope Francis, a change leader. So CEOs need to model that kind of behavior because there's so much change swirling around. The number one thing they have to do is find a way to play more offense. The research shows that the successful companies, incumbent companies, play 15% more offense. They find a way more strategically to be more effective, to create momentum within their system, to use a kind of move the movable strategy that rewards loyalty and creates momentum within their own customer base. So, in other words, insurgent companies, the most powerful combination, Michael, is an incumbent company that acts like an insurgent. Because you have the advantages of incumbent scale, yet you think like an insurgent. That's an unbeatable combination today.
Oh, well, that's a great point to bring up. And just so you know, we thank you again for joining us here on The Point, 50.1's Point. We're taking your questions on Twitter. We do have one question that comes in for you, David, and it asks, what is the one experience that sticks out with you the most of an incumbent who acted like an insurgent?
Well, I mean, I think, an example of that would be, our first corporate client was Steve Jobs, who asked us to come out, Scott Miller, my partner, to think like a political campaign back in the 80s. And so we worked with Jobs back, and he gave us the word insurgent. It's kind of an interesting word, which anchors our 50.1% offering. That's the sort of common strategic denominator that drives everything we do. I mean, the comeback of Apple, when Jobs, in Shakespearean fashion, came back to the company that had fired him, the company that he founded, and did one of the great classic turnarounds of all time. And Apple, on a good day, in a couple of years, may end up being $1 trillion company. I mean, it's an amazing market cap. It's about $780 billion today. So obviously, that's a great example of an incumbent company getting back to its insurgent roots and succeeding. There are other examples of CEO founders that have come back, like Nike, Starbucks, companies like that, and done the same thing. McDonald's, we did an incumbent turnaround with insurgent strategies about 10, 12 years ago. There's some good examples of it. It works.
Well, in one of the examples that you kind of point out in your book, and really it's a must-read, great book, great insight here. And one of the points that you bring out, though, is Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And actually, because of their fierce competition, because being industry leaders, they have actually made themselves insurgents in order to stay ahead or get ahead of the other.
Right.
Is that?
It's true. And at different times, both Coke and Pepsi have been insurgent companies and less insurgent companies. And every time they get into an insurgent mindset, they do well. And I'll make one more point. It's interesting, over 30 years, you can argue neither of those companies has successfully innovated a product in-house. One of the things we learn at 50.1 is that innovation happens in the periphery. So we try and find examples of great innovation on the periphery and bring it into incumbent companies that are in the center of their marketplace. So it's a powerful concept that we learned. Both Coke and Pepsi missed the energy drink rage, the water drinking rage, the tea drinking rage. So, it's an example of how insurgency works. There are a lot of amazing ideas in America that happen in dorm rooms at Harvard or in garages in the Silicon Valley. That's where some of the great American companies are born, and that's where insurgency thrives.
One of the things that you've spoken to business leaders and, as you said, politicians and organizations across the country is being creative and thinking like a magician.
Yeah.
So we think like a magician and say, well, geez, what does that? Does that mean reinventing the wheel? Right. Does that mean pulling tricks out of your hat? What does thinking like a magician mean if I'm a business leader? What do I need to do to think like a magician and, I guess, act like one?
Well, so the sequel to this book is coming out this year, Underdog Advantage 2.0. One of the third book we're going to be doing is called Think Like a Magician, which is using the strategies of magic, which I do in speeches, to get out of the box, because people are very powerful when they use disruptive thinking. And magicians are really good at disruptive thinking because they understand perceptions and they understand about innovation out in the periphery. So we have an example of this. I have a message for you, Michael.
Oh, okay.
Do me a favor. Name a number out loud between 1 and 100.
8.
8. Did you say 8?
I said 8.
Now, why 8? Is there some reason you said 8?
8 was actually, that was my football number in college.
So, but we did not prearrange this.
We did not prearrange.
So that's why he's smiling, because he's telling the truth. We did not prearrange it, and you just said the number 8. And I wrote something 2 days ago on a piece of paper. It's folded. I don't want to touch it. Could you please open that up? I'll hold the book if you'd like, if that's helpful. Open it up in a loud voice. Tell them what you just are reading.
Michael will say 8.
Well, hang on one second. It says Michael will say 8, and the number that came to your mind a moment ago was 8?
That number came to my mind before you even asked. 1
to
I
100. Love when that works. I love when that works. So that's, what happened? That's an example of, forget how it worked, of how your perception saw it. And so we study those principles, and we figure out how to do magic even more innovatively. And that's what companies have to do. They have to create magic, like Disney, like other companies have done in a great insurgent sense.
Well, that has me thinking beyond magic right now. He performs magic. He's a tremendous speaker across the country, across the world, and he's also a global strategist. We thank you, David, for coming on today. And we're going to continue this conversation on the 50.1 Twitter. That's at 50.1. And if you have any more questions for us and for David, of course, just ask it. We'll be sure to respond. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike.